All right, we're going to kick back off here. All right, well, thank you very much for coming back and joining us. Our next panel is going to be the Fast Tracking Acquisition panel. And this is one of my favorite panels, not to say anything negative about the other ones, but this is one of the ones that I've been most excited about because we've been able to put together a great group of talent here and some of the more exciting agencies throughout government working on the theme that we're really trying to attack here is, really bringing in the best-in-breed technologies to the government. So without any further ado, let me introduce our panelists. From left to right, we have Meagan Metzger, founder and CEO of Dcode. I'm going to let them introduce themselves a little bit in terms of their program, but I'm going to start with the names, all right? All right, so we have Meagan Metzger from the left, founder and CEO of Dcode. In the middle, we have Ashley Owens, Director of Acquisition for 18F at GSA. And then Traci Walker, Director of Digital Service Procurement at the U.S. Digital Service. So why don't we start with you, Traci? Could you start off and talk a little bit about your role over at USDS and how it goes?
Sure, no problem. So I've been a contracting officer in the government for many years now, and after President Obama decided to create U.S. Digital Service, one of the big things they wanted to make sure that was included in that was not just bringing in people who could fix the tech, but also people who could fix the acquisition piece of it, which I know, TTS had that same thought as well. And so over the past 5 years now, we're about to turn 5, which is pretty awesome. We've done a lot in the realm of doing projects and showing what can be done with rapid acquisition, getting things to delivery, showing how we can bring in companies that know how to do this in industry and saying, okay, we're going to help you get through the barriers of entry to government. So bringing in, new, hungry, young companies. And then also workforce training. And that's been one of the things that I've been really focusing on over the past several years is how do we kind of reskill the workforce into understanding what this is. And so last year, we launched and created the FACSI Digital Service Certificate for contracting officers, which basically establishes a specialization for contracting officers in this field. So one of the things we're looking at is like, if you're a buyer and you don't know your industry, how can you be that effective? If you don't know how to write a contract to do agile software development or user-centered design, you're trying to kind of force everything back into the traditional government model, you're going to see problems and it's not going to be very successful. So one of the things we're saying, instead of trying to, go after the laws, the policies, the regulations, we want to teach people that the flexibilities that exist in the federal regulations already are there and how to use them and become champions for that change to kind of really bring that forward. So that was launched last year, and we have roughly around 200 people graduating by the end of this year with 11 different cohorts. So you're going to see a huge influx, hopefully, of specialists that know how to do these kinds of procurements. And the next thing we're tackling right now is product ownership and product management thinking for the other side of the contract. Once you've awarded it, you have to have people that understand how to administer and actually get the products delivered. And so product thinking and bringing that to the government, the acquisition workforce. So that's where we're at right now.
Okay. Ashley?
Hi, I'm Ashley Owens. Again, I'm the Director of Acquisition at 18F. I, like Traci, was a contracting officer prior, and I didn't know what was happening. I just know 5 years later, I was getting CD-ROMs and not systems. And I'm like, I got to fix this. So I came over to TTS as a procurement analyst thinking like, oh, it must be the policy. And then fast forward, I've fully drank the Kool-Aid on Agile, all things Agile. And so essentially that's my role is I take the concepts of Agile and the values of Scrum and apply it to the acquisition process. And we promote open source, open API, and human-centered design. But it's human-centered design in terms of your acquisition products. Thinking about your customers in a different way, thinking about how you collaborate with industry in a different way. I can't stress enough how Agile is a cultural shift, and the government is really large. And so it makes change hard, but I'm here to break the wheel and make better procurements that will make all citizens' lives better, which is essentially TTS's overall mission.
Okay, Meagan.
Awesome. Well, good morning or afternoon. I'm not sure where we are right now. So, like you said, I'm the CEO of Dcode, and we are a nice complement to the other side of the equation from the two other speakers here this morning. So we have one mission, and that is how do we help the government get access to better emerging technologies and capabilities so we can be better at our missions, whether that's supporting our citizens or making our soldiers safer. And so we've really become kind of this central point for the entire community of tech, government, and the partner ecosystem to connect. And we do that through two things. So one, we run an acceleration program for technologies that are looking to understand the government market. It's really hard. I think we all know that. And a lot of it is how do they navigate procurement from the other side is a big piece of it. And we run them around different topics. So we've done artificial intelligence as a program and a cohort. We're about to launch space. We're doing health IT. And we've accelerated 70 technologies to date. And they're actually across, I think, 52 different programs and agencies right now, which is really fantastic. So there's definitely, when you bring all of this together, and what we'll talk about today, there's definitely results that can happen. The other side of that is we run a training program for government leaders, and it's around the culture and how do you navigate the bureaucracy. So I completely echo what she said, which is everything that we need is there, whether it's procurement in the FAR and some of the more innovative acquisition methodologies that we can use. And if we understand how to kind of do bureaucracy jiu-jitsu, then we can get the solutions that we need in the door. So we've trained 200 leaders so far this year, and we have a whole boatload coming up, and that will help. And the perspective that we bring to that training is we know what the pain is like from the other side, from the technology companies, so we can help also the government empathize on the outputs of what comes out in a procurement and the effects that has on the technologies.
All right, well, wonderful. See, like I said, just a great range of backgrounds and experiences for both on the government side and then having Meagan's perspective too of working with some of those companies and getting their perspectives of what's working and what's not. So I guess to start the conversation, I really thought it would be great to talk a little bit about some of the trends that you guys have seen over the past 5 years. It seems like there have been quite a few new programs that have been or initiatives that have come forward. So I was wondering if we could start with you, Traci, and just some of the trends that you've seen within that acquisition process, especially when it comes to bringing aboard some of these new technologies within government agencies.
I think one of the biggest trends that I've seen right now is the fact that acquisitions are becoming much faster for tech. Instead of thinking that you have to go through the 9-10 month process, year process, and I know this is echoed by the 18F, but we're looking at more modular, smaller contracts which carry less risk. But then also doing way more, call it the Missouri thing, which is show me versus tell me. Can say that. Yeah. But basically the idea that you're doing design challenges or coding challenges and we're getting away from the 100-page PWSs that is supposed to be a good indicator of whether or not you're going to be successful on a project, and just having conversations with companies that we want to work with and say that this is completely allowed to start this trust factor building now. And I think that's another thing, too, that we're seeing a lot of is that the teams coming together and saying we are all one team and we're trying to serve an end user that may have really hard problems getting some service from the government. So we need to stop all the infighting and figure out how do we make that person's life easier in navigating their own government systems that they have to do. So seeing a lot more of those trends.
Okay. Ashley?
I would say on one side, some things haven't changed, but it's because we have habits, right? And we're used to traditional contracting. But I feel like now everyone at least knows the word agile or has some kind of idea what it is. And curiosity makes you want to know more, which is always a good thing. At 18F, what we found is that training along with pairing. So at 18F, we do acquisition consulting, we do assisted acquisition, but the idea is once you teach somebody a concept, also showing a contracting officer the how is how you really create change in the agile space. And I think the secretary in the Fireside Chat talked about this, how the culture change in agile requires a humanistic humility reset, right? And so we have to do introspective thinking and retrospectives, if you want to talk about an agile word. And that is what's going to lead to better procurements. Another trend is because of this introspection, more agencies are using non-traditional methods of reaching vendors. So we post everything in GitHub. All of our partners post everything in GitHub, and it's again that Scrum value of openness. If we've done an RFQ good for software development, why not share it with the world? And so some other office can pick that up and be able to use it. So overall, I would say the trend I see the most is that more people have an appetite for Agile, and that makes my heart happy.
That's good.
Yeah, I think the programs that these women work on are great indicators of the trends that are going on. You know, Dcode started about 3.5 years ago, and at that point, you know, the DoD hadn't moved out to Silicon Valley yet, and that's one of the major trends that I've noticed is not only are we trying to get there faster through the means that they spoke about, but the realization that the market research that we do is not a check in the box for a FAR requirement. Mm-hmm. That, you know, we can't hand some requirements over to our contracting staff and expect them to identify artificial intelligence solutions. You know, we have to do tech scouting. We have to reach them in a different way because a lot of the vendors that we want in the government are not reading FBO.gov. Mm-hmm. Right? So I've seen a big uptick, whether it's the Air Force or DHS. I mean, almost every agency are moving out to Silicon Valley and Austin and Boston and trying to hold more challenges and reach a different population.
Okay.
I also see a disruption from the industry side as well, where you kind of have the, prior to, past 5 years, you have the traditional industry day, you have the traditional kind of, we're going to tell you our requirements, you're going to tell us kind of what you think it should be doing. And we're seeing that happen a lot earlier in the process. And if it is kind of more that traditional way, we're seeing a lot more companies speaking up and saying, yeah, you put all this stuff in the RFQ and that kind of breaks the Agile process. That's not going to work for us. And, we really don't want to, necessarily bid on this because of the fact that we can just see that this is going to be a problem. So standing up and saying like, there are the challenges to this and we're going to be the kind of company that like, we would rather not get the business than to see it not work out. And so I see a lot of courage and bravery kind of coming from the industry in this space saying, yeah, kind of government, you got to fix this stuff. We're not ready. You're not ready for this yet. So let's get it together, to kind of come together to, put in that collaboration and, start small and then figure out how do you scale bigger.
Well, you mentioned process, and that was going to be the next question, is some of the changes that have occurred within the acquisition process, specifically the way proposals are being submitted. So we've seen some of the trends where instead of the traditional paper proposal response to the RFP, we've seen some hackathons as well as some demos. I was wondering if the three of you could talk a little bit about how has that been effective, and what are some of the pros and cons to that so far?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I think the fact that we're doing something different is fantastic because this isn't just a thing that's nice to do. This is an absolute necessity that we figure this out because the technologies that we're talking about on stage are not going to respond to a 100-page RFP because I'm just going to go sell to Capital One instead or another market. So they're going to avoid the government altogether, and we're going to really miss the wave of private sector technologies that could be here. And I've seen a lot of success come out of things like the challenges and the prizes. Meagan Metzger's personal soapbox is sometimes we do them for more of the marketing and the fanfare to say that we did a challenge and a prize, but that's not the point. The point is to do something with the outcome of that. So if we're going to run a challenge, Air Force is a great example. They ran their challenge around the new generation of helmets, and they actually got really interesting solutions and had a plan to do prototyping work following on. So if you can use the challenge as more of that down select into maybe a FAR procurement, then you're doing something. But if you're doing a challenge just to say, we did a challenge and it was innovative, then I think we've missed the boat a little bit.
Okay. Ashley?
I want to say get out of my head. I feel the same way. Again, applying Agile principles to acquisition, if you look at your evaluation criteria in a human-centered way, evaluation criteria should mimic the landscape in which the vendor is going to operate. So if you are with a defense, doing a defense contract, and you will have to ship code in real time under very extreme conditions, yeah, give them a 4-hour challenge, because that might be real. I don't know. But if they're going to have a year to build code, just tell them send you what they built. Show me what you built. There's nothing wrong with similar experience. You don't have to use the traditional past performance evaluation criteria. So I think it's about looking at evaluation criteria from that standpoint. Also, using the phased approach, where, to Megan's point, there's not so much volume up front. We did this with Centers of Excellence. We had the challenge first. They had 2 days to respond to the challenge. That was the first cut. And then there was another phase, and both were only half pages long. And so by the time you got to the third phase, vendors didn't have to waste all of, I think it's like around $10,000 a page sometimes to write a proposal. But you get to the third phase, and if you're out, you didn't have to waste that money writing all those pages. And if you're in, you still only had 10 pages to submit. So I think it's, again, meeting industry where they are, and then on our side, thinking about our evaluation criteria in a more human-centered way.
Yeah, I think we've taken the phased approach to heart as well at the U.S. Digital Service. Doing the tell me kind of what you're going to do. We'll see if we want to come and see it and actually meet you, and then see what you can do for us. And a lot of times, though, we have had some lessons learned around this, which is, be thoughtful about what kind of challenge you're going to make the companies run. If it is going to be a 4-hour challenge, is that really what you want to see? And if at the end of that, your requirement is to build an MVP or a prototype within those 4 hours, are you actually evaluating what you need to know whether or not that contractor is going to be successful on your contract, or can they just run a fire drill in 4 hours? And, we have to make sure that agencies are very thoughtful about that, to say, okay, we did a challenge. We don't want that to become the next new thing, or a code challenge or design challenge that becomes the next thing that you've rubber stamped and you aren't actually really thinking about what that is. But also having the technical evaluators that have the skill level that's commensurate with the kind of challenge you're actually going to put out. So if you put out code challenges and you don't have anybody that can understand how to read and evaluate code, don't do a code challenge. If you have a design challenge and you're just really wanting to know the process of it, don't be worried about whether or not they're doing the things exactly the way you would do them as a designer, but are they getting to the point and to the end result? So having also, one of the things we recommend is that if you are going to do a challenge, that your technical evaluation team or some team within your government side can actually execute the challenge you're asking them to do before you put it out there. So, making sure that it's feasible to get that done is one of the big things.
Go ahead, Meagan.
I mean, beyond challenges, there are some really fantastic acquisition vehicles that we can use now to address this requirements problem. Because what we still see happening quite a bit is we are buying software and these emerging capabilities the same way that we're buying an airplane. And it's down to spec. And what we unintentionally do is block innovation that way, because we put a spec in there that we thought was important, and a company might solve your problem a completely different way, but now they can't bid because they're going to be non-compliant. But we can look at things like the CXO from GSA, or BAAs or OTAs, that will allow you to get a quick synopsis. If it's interesting enough, then you can discuss what the actual RFP and the requirement should look like with the vendors, so that you're more informed on what a solution could look like, instead of making a guess and kind of blocking innovation that way.
Okay, interesting. So Traci, you made a comment earlier about micro purchases and some of the things that USDS is working with that. Could you talk a little bit more about that, go into a few more details about how you mentioned it takes away some of the risk?
Yeah, so one of the cool things that came out over the past year in the NDAA that got applied to everyone is the fact that the micro purchase level got raised from $3,500 to $10,000. That's a huge jump, and we really pushed for that. Helped OFPP to say well, what does that give you? What leverage does that give you? Well, one, you can go buy a license and test it out within your own, organization to say, okay, does this work, as opposed to having to do market research solely without touching products. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of in a trend, some of the graduates from the DITAP program in VA are using it to actually run small mini competitions through GitHub for come and build an API or give us an API strategy. And they're doing basically something that's like a 2-week sprint that they pay about $10,000 for. And so they get to have the discovery from industry before they actually have to make the full requirements or go back for a full acquisition. Additionally, we're seeing a lot of companies kind of looking at that and saying, how can I create micro consulting opportunities so that you can have a 2 or 3 day session with us? And in the sense, in regular commercial industry, you just call a company in and be like, okay, here's our problem. Tell us what to do for it. And that company that was trying to get that business would look at that and be like, I'm not going to charge you for that. Well, we we can't do that in government. So using micro purchase threshold and that authority now can help us really get to have these conversations with companies to help us define our requirements, not to the sense of like putting in, like you said, the elements that have to be there, but understanding what is the possibility in the market and what are innovative ideas that we could potentially bring in, and being able to pay a fair market value with it, but at the same time being able to use the micro purchase threshold, which is not something controlled by acquisition shops by itself. A lot of program offices have the authority to use the micro purchase card. So seeing program offices being able to get involved in this from that stage is really good as well.
Megan, have you seen that at any other agencies that you guys have worked with?
Yeah, I mean, we see a big uptake in I'm a fan of the micro consulting. I mean, we can hire interns and build an entire app in a week. You know, there's so much that we can do for so much less money, and I think it really opens a lot of doors to get a license, try something quickly, and test it out.
Well, it also goes to the companies that haven't done the that don't necessarily want to go through SAM or get the DUNS number and all that stuff. You can do the micro purchase, consulting, micro purchasing without having to go through all those government hoops to just start working with the government too.
And the best thing about micro purchase is it's like true to agile that you're starting small and iterating out. The cap forces you to stay small, for one, and it gives small business a foot in the door. You know, that's going to be appetizing to any small business. $10,000. I mean, that's a way for me to show the government and get some experience under my belt for the next bigger contract that I try to go bid for.
Okay. So, Ashley, I'm going to go back to you for something that you brought up during kind of our preparatory call, talking a little bit about infrastructure as a service is something that you've seen quite a bit. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that applies within 18F and GSA?
Yeah, I feel like cloud buying is like one of the biggest things we get asked about. I mean, everybody's migrating to the cloud. Where is the cloud? Yeah, right.
So high up.
Right. We have stickers that literally say cloud, or they're just a computer somewhere else. But a lot of you hear things, right? And a part of agile again is not starting with a solution. So your problem may be indeed that you're migrating to the cloud, but it doesn't mean that infrastructure as a service is automatically your solution. Maybe platform as a service is your solution. Maybe something like, shameless plug, cloud.gov is your solution. But it's about 1102s thinking about their job in a different way. I consider 1102s the tip of the spear in IT modernization. Like the choices we make each fiscal year transcend for years to come. And you need to ask certain questions like, what kind of applications are we trying to move to the cloud? Does it require a lot of configuration? What kind of setup does our organization have? Do we have all the governance in place? Do we have all the security controls in place? And asking those kinds of questions will determine if infrastructure as a service or platform as a service is the best for you, or maybe some combination of both. And so that's kind of what we promote at 18F in the space of cloud buying.
Okay. Have you seen any of that at USDS so far?
Well, I mean, I think we've used cloud.gov, definitely. But absolutely, like, modern technology stack and the whole, like, decisions that go into that is one of the big things that we make as kind of a prerequisite to going into work with any agency. We see a lot of legacy systems that are out there, and so we have to help agencies figure out how are they going to make that migration and how are they going to come up to something that is, capable of handling all of the data and all of the records and everything like that. So, we definitely see a lot of the trends. We don't necessarily, prescribe one way or another which way you should go, because it is that question of what works best within your environment. But from pretty much all of our projects that we've worked on, we've increased the ability for the agency either to get on the cloud or to establish a cloud for the first time, or infrastructure or whatever, as a service that they potentially get, and then making the decision of what open source software to kind of put on top of that and how to build that out is kind of our traditional play that we put in.
Okay. Well, speed has been a theme that's come up multiple times. Secretary Gertz talked a lot about it as the Navy is being rigged for speed. So I want to bring up that topic. What are some of the different fast-tracking strategies that you've seen within acquisition? This is a question for all three of you, that have proved successful. And then I'll flip it to, what have been some that you've seen that haven't worked as well? I'll start with you, Traci.
Okay. So one of the things we've worked on at the U.S. Digital Service is we worked with the Small Business Administration to come up with a digital service 8A initiative, and you can find out more about that on the techvarhub.cio.gov. And basically what that is, the 8A program is fantastic for government because it allows you to have a single source award with a developing business for up to $4 million, which is perfect in the low risk environment of getting started with digital service in a safe way without busting a ceiling or making it too big for what you can handle with the skill sets that you have. And so what that allows is that we've put out 3 statements of objectives out there really around learning the process, selecting the technology that would work best for you, and then building a digital MVP. So this is really geared toward agencies that have not really gone into this. The cool thing is we worked with an agency recently, last February. They were able to do an acquisition from beginning until end using this 8A program in basically 3 weeks from concept of doing we picked the company, did a kind of a vendor day of having them come in, kind of demonstrate a little bit, selected the company, and then had the ink on the contract signed, basically 3 weeks later. And then this was in February, and in May of 2018, they launched their first product live, their first MVP live. So being able to show an agency, and this was a very large program as well, but being able to show an agency that they could actually get something done from an acquisition standpoint to actually seeing something live in less than 6 months they were just like, this doesn't happen here. And so it's really cool to see those trends happening.
Yeah. Ashley?
Yeah, this is why my tagline is making procurement joyful, because it's like exciting when you get things like fast and get it done.
I haven't heard the word joyful yet.
Yeah,
so I appreciate
literally
that.
every time I say making procurement joyful, like the whole room laughs. But one day it's gonna be like just a thing. We use a lot of workshopping. Again, in the agile space, collaboration is a big thing. And I've literally sat with clients, and in 3 days we had a draft RFQ. Unheard of, right? Like usually to put out a draft RFQ takes weeks. But when you've already validated your problem space through the proper discovery, let's say processes, procedures, since it's government, you know what your problem is, and so it's easier to write this RFQ that's going out to the world. And also you're not, to Traci's point, taking 9 months to write requirements because you're trusting the industry to give you the solution. All we need to say is our objectives. So that's helping the government get out to the market faster. And then in terms of evaluation, again, the phased approach, we typically see from start to finish in a competitive environment. So not sole source, but a 90-day turnaround from start to finish. That's still a big deal in government. And the last thing I'll say is in the post-award environment, which to me becomes the most important part in Agile, because pre-award becomes really easy because you're not trying to write everything. You're trusting the industry to give you a solution. And so the post-award environment, when you're getting code delivered every 2 weeks, that's pretty fast. It's better than writing a waterfall contract and then waiting 5 years to see a thing that you have to plan change management, you have to plan governance. There's all these other things you have to plan on top of the thing that's probably going to have 1 million bugs when it comes out because it didn't have that human-centered design piece that you got to insert in. So I think, again, applying Agile to all parts of acquisition just inherently gives us speed.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I've seen that I'm a big fan of. I actually really like the DHS Silicon Valley Innovation Programs methodology, especially for technologies that are coming in. So up front, they say it is X number of phases for X number of dollars, and it creates a predictability because on the commercial side, if you're a private sector and you're the salesperson coming into the government and you have to go report what your pipeline looks like in government, it's really hard. Like, how's that coming? I don't know. When will it be awarded? No clue. Do you have competition? Probably. It's really difficult and you lose your job. So it is predictable, but what that also allows them to do is in the phases, prove out in an agile fashion whether or not the technology worked. And if it does, then you move it to the next phase and you're testing multiple types of technology against the same problem set. So we're not making a huge award and putting all of our eggs in one basket with a company. So I think it works well on both sides. I've seen some programs actually that do take contracting staff on ride-alongs so they can actually understand and be connected to the mission, and it's incredible how impactful that is because otherwise we have mounds of paper as contracting folks just we have to get through by the end of the year, and it's much easier for us to understand what you're looking for if we've seen and lived the problem that you have. The last one I would mention is the way that the Air Force has revamped the SBIR program is really fascinating. So they have an open topic for dual-use technologies, so specifically looking for technology that was built for private sector to come back into the government, and it's an open invitation. So anyone can submit an SBIR proposal under the topic, and then they set aside a bucket of funds, and the phase one, which is usually that discovery phase, is actually intended for them to go find a customer. Okay. So rather than having to know exactly what the requirements are and what they're trying to solve, they then get to go explore different offices across the Air Force and find someone that wants the tech they have and execute the SBIR that way. And one of our companies said it restored their faith in government contracting.
Okay, that's excellent.
And you asked about a con. The only con I see is you can't move so fast that you forsake processes or compliance, right? Because for a while, that was a stigma around Agile. It was like, oh, if it's Agile, so it must not be compliant, or if there's not all of this paperwork, how do we know that all of the things have been checked? And so it's about speed, but also keeping in mind that this is still the government, and there are still things that we need to have in place.
Okay.
But I would say the last thing is failing to plan for the follow-on. So, and a lot of times we're moving fast and we've made these awards quickly and we're getting to prototype, and then we stop and we restart this 2-year process to get to the actual production contract. And so you have to think about that day one.
Yeah.
So you're not getting to the end of it and then realizing you need an acquisition strategy.
Okay. So we're just about out of time here, but I wanted to close and ask all three of you a question. What's next? So we talked a lot about some of the trends that have happened over the past 5 years. What's something that you see as over the horizon and maybe taking the government to that next level when it comes to introducing new technologies to agencies?
Well, like I kind of mentioned before, we're really trying to make a push to getting everyone in government have a product thinking kind of mindset as opposed to a project-based thinking mindset, and really understanding that this is how technology is built in industry and how much can we bring of that into the government without having to recreate our own government version of what that looks like. And so, a lot of the stuff that we're working on aligns to the CAP goals with IT modernization and reskilling the workforce. So I think that we'll see more of that coming out, because the model with USDS is that, and 18F is that we hire and bring in engineers, product managers, and design, user-centered design experts, because we just don't have that skill set within the government. Well, what would it look like in the government if we had those skill sets? And then we're able to do and outsource the remainder of that to the companies that we need to work with. I think that whole picture provides a much brighter future for where we are, and that really just comes up with just updating skills that we haven't had the opportunity to do in the government.
Okay, great. Ashley?
I don't know if this is next, but I hope it's next. And I think that's openness. I'm really big on open source code and open APIs. Budgets are shrinking every fiscal year. The budgets that do come down, 80% of that budget is usually to keep patching up the old bad thing, and there's not really that much money to start the new thing. So those departments or entities that are like forward-looking and forward-thinking, when they're building these systems and they're putting this code out in the open, some other agency that has a very similar mission to you is able to pick it up, and they're able to start at a cheaper price. Because something already existed. And the thing about government is I know a lot of people are like, well, all of your missions kind of sound the same. Yeah, we do a lot of the same things. Everybody writes contracts. Everybody does grants. But everybody's mission has a nuance, which requires that customization. So what I really hope is next is that more organizations start building open systems that everyone will be able to adopt. And then more small businesses are maybe able to come to the table. More large businesses are able to shape technologies and how we produce our work and how citizens receive their benefits through websites, through systems. It's my hope that once we create this culture of openness, it also breaks down those barriers between government and industry, and we start working in like a truly collaborative way, because the technical debt is high, and we can only pay it down together.
Okay, Meagan?
Mine's kind of continuation from that thread. Maybe it's a hope and a dream, but we do now that we're thinking big and starting to act small and more incrementally, which I think really is fantastic. And I think what that will ultimately do is change the expectations that we have as the government on our existing contracting staff and the incumbent community, because we need to start behaving differently and also coming along for the ride of thinking big and acting small. I also see a big shift from the butts in seats to pulling in products from the private sector instead of building everything from scratch, so that we can get there faster instead of recreating the wheel every time. So I think we'll continue to see that shift.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to all three of you for sharing a few of those ideas. Thank you.
All right.